Good afternoon. We're convening the Higher Education and Technology Committee. Today is Friday, February 9th, 2024. Time is 2 p.m. We're in room 309 of the Hawaii State Capitol. And we're going to, we have a fairly short agenda, but I wanted to alert folks that we plan to do decision-making on this agenda Wednesday at 2 p.m. in this room. So if you have further responsibilities or obligations this afternoon, please don't stick around just to hear the decisions. So we're going to start with, before we get started, I do want to provide some guidelines. If you're on Zoom, please keep yourself muted and your video off while you're waiting to testify and after your testimony is complete. The Zoom chat function allows you to chat, but please only use the chat for technical issues. If you're disconnected unexpectedly, you may attempt to rejoin the meeting and we'll try to reconnect you, and you may be allowed to continue if time permits. Please note the House is not responsible for any bad internet connections on the testifier's end, and it's interesting we'll be talking about this today. In the event of a network failure, it may be necessary to reschedule the hearing or schedule a meeting for decision-making. In that case, an appropriate notice will be posted. And also, please refrain from using any trademarked or copyrighted images. Please refrain, for everyone, from using profanity or engaging in uncivil behavior. I'm sure that's not a problem. Such behavior may be grounds for removal from the hearing without the ability to rejoin. So let's get started. We're going to start with SB 1511, SD2, relating to the Research Corporation of the University of Hawaii, and I'll just read the overview so we have a sense of where we are. This measure would clarify the purpose of the Research Corporation of the University of Hawaii and that its undertaking shall be limited to acts that are reasonably necessary to carry out its purpose. It repeals the requirement that the University of Hawaii contract with the Research Corporation when the university determines that other various agencies cannot more effectively or efficiently accomplish certain research and training activities. It grandfathers existing Research Corporation contracts and requires new contracts be subject to new limitations, limits the scope of the special account the Research Corporation is authorized to establish, requires that revolving accounts requires revolving accounts to follow UH Administrative Procedure 12204, limits internal service orders and revolving accounts of the Research Corporation that use university intramural funds to certain projects and requires biannual reports to the legislature. So the first to testify in this measure, Vasilis Sirmus, University of Hawaii, with comments in person.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair. Thank you for having us today. We stand on our testimony, written testimony. We believe that any type of issues that they have been brought up the last couple of years amongst the relationship between RCUH and UH, they have been fixed. We have refreshed all our executive policies, Regents policies, and administrative procedures that actually guide us through that relationship. There is only one administrative procedure that we are in the midst of refreshing as we speak, and that is Administrative Procedure 12.203. Thank you.
Thank you. The next to testify, we have Leonard Gouveia, RCUH, in opposition, in person.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair. Lenny Gouveia, Executive Director of RCUH. I stand on my written testimony and available for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. That's all we have signed up to testify in person or on Zoom. We also have testimony from Randy Pereira, HGA, in support, and 3 individuals in support. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on this measure?
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Nui Sebas with HGEA. We stand on our written testimony in strong support. I just want to note that we have serious concerns about the hiring process at RCUH and fear that they may be using this as a vehicle to supplement positions that should be included in civil service. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Members, are there any questions? I have some questions. I think I'd like to start with RCUH.
I don't see an app for that.
AI has gotten out of control. My first question, I think, is, when I asked you for a report, a listing of all of the contracts that have gone through RCUH, and I'm concerned first about the principal investigators. So when I look at that list, can you explain to me why we might see, for example, Mr. Sirmos or President Lasner listed as the principal investigator on some of these extremely large contracts?
Sure. I think Vasilis can give you more of a history of that, dating way back before he was even in his current role. But from my experience with it being both on the UH side and the RCUH side, VP for research, previous Dr. Gaines, for example, there are a lot of awards that are given to the university that he may be in his specialty. So he would be the PI on those, that's his specialty. And he would also have other awards that may not be his specialty, but they get awards from the federal government, and those awards are attached to someone who's responsible for it, and it goes to the VP or president, I believe. For example, President Lasner, when he was with IT, he had a lot of IT awards. MHPCC, which is no longer MHPCC, but that would be an award that is under him with his expertise. And then, of course, there's other awards that do get awarded to the state, and someone at UH has to be responsible for it. So I think some of them is by role, whoever's in that role, to make sure that the money is spent properly and the award is executed for the deliverables. Does that answer?
It begins to answer some of my questions, but, President Lasner is not here, so I'm just going to ask you some general questions so we can better understand the nature of what's happening. So I understand that some of these contracts may have predated his tenure as president.
Correct.
But then my concern is that, I understand that there was a policy that was worked on with respect to dual employment. So that's no longer possible under RCUH policy, correct?
Correct. Under UH policy first, and then we follow UH, correct.
So if someone is identified as a principal investigator, they are responsible for allocating, not only for overseeing and directing that research.
Right.
They are ultimately responsible for the outcomes of that research and for allocating all of the resources that are involved in that research effort. Is that correct?
Correct. Under the university policies, yes.
Okay. So I identified, I think, 7 or 8 contracts that were on which President Lasner was listed as the principal investigator.
Correct.
And it's my understanding that he wouldn't be accepting additional pay right now because, he can act as a principal investigator and not accept any pay. Like it doesn't necessitate payment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, but my concern is that it seems like that might be a conflict of interest. So I'm wondering, so you're responsible for RCUH.
Correct.
And I'm wondering if it has ever occurred to you that this might be a conflict of interest.
I don't think it's a conflict of interest. The dual employment was terminated a few years back. I have my own opinions on that. I think that there's times where a dual employment would be appropriate, but I do respect the difficulties with the compliance issues with federal government money, especially. If you were going to go down that road, you'd have to get the proper approvals from the sponsors, and of course, identify your exact work hours. You can't be double dipping, right? So if you're going to be doing dual employment, exactly what % are you doing for your UH role or the RCUH role? But As far as the PIs are concerned, you need to be a UHPI in order to have award come through the university. So as the PI, they use service orders to process things through RCUH, hiring personnel to support the projects. Like you noted, President Lasner doesn't get paid for the work that he's doing on projects. So if he has a project, he'll hire people to work on those projects. And Vasilis has some as well.
Yeah, if you would come up and help us better understand this.
So, Chair, on certain of these projects, some of them are institutional, where the executive in the position assumes the role of the principal investigator. The ones you referred about, Dr. Lasner, these are not institutional awards. David was the principal investigator before being a president of the university. So he has a substantial expertise in executing those, and he's not paid. So as far as conflict of interest is concerned, it was us, and it was my office that stopped the dual employment between RCUH and UH. We were very concerned because not only for conflict of interest, we were majorly concerned of conflicts of commitment, because in certain cases, these dual appointments would surpass the 100% FTE, the full-time employment of an employee. And, federal government, as I'm pretty sure the state government as well, would have an issue with that.
So I have questions about how one person who is responsible for running the entire university system is also the principal investigator on 8 massive contracts.
Yeah, so the contracts you see for that is the Maui High Performance Computing Center. So David on this one probably provides an advisory and guidance role. The Maui High Performance Computing Center is run by Dr. Tiare Martin. She is a very competent individual. I do know personally that David is involved in the reviews when the sponsoring agency comes to town. David participates in these reviews. So I think he's doing his job as a principal investigator.
I am not sure that he's able to do his job as president of the university at the same time. And that's my concern. I'm not concerned about his ability to fulfill his responsibilities on the contracts. I'm concerned about student housing. So that's really where I'm coming from.
I appreciate that. Right.
So just to be clear. So I think then it goes to, I have additional questions if it's okay if I... Okay. Okay, thank you. So then to better understand the situation we're in, and I do wish President Lasner was here, but he's not able to be with us here today. But it's my understanding that once he leaves his position as president of the university, there's a mandatory 6-month cooling off period, correct?
Yes.
But then he will, after that 6 months, be in a position to then be financially compensated as a PI?
Yes and no. First of all, as long as he receives a non-compensated appointment from the university after his retirement, he will be able to remain as a principal investigator on these awards. Because by our region's policies, in order to be a principal investigator, you have to be a Board of Regents employee of the university, and usually faculty that retire, they're not Board of Regents appointed employees anymore. Even if you're an emeritus faculty, that's a title. It's not an HR connection between yourself and the university. So
but that's something that happens. So the non-comp is a possibility.
It is a possibility. So if that happens, then David will be eligible to remain the PI on these awards. You are correct. There is a 6-month cooling period that he cannot be paid between the day of his retirement and paid again by RCUH, not the state. The state cannot compensate you after these 6 months, otherwise you jeopardize your retirement. However, he could, technically he could compensate himself out of that as an RCUH employee. Personally, if you ask me, I doubt it, but the possibility is there, the option is there.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Govea.
Okay.
So I'm curious as to why you did not ask President Lasner to divest himself of his position as PI on these contracts. As you're responsible for RCUH, all of these contracts are coming through you.
Correct.
Is that within your scope to ask him to raise those questions, or who would be asking those questions?
I think the Board of Regents would be the appropriate.
Does this come to the Board of Regents? Are they aware that he's a PI on all of these contracts?
I'm sure they are.
Have you had
Yeah,
public discussions about this?
I'm not sure about public discussions on it, but I'm sure they're aware of it because everything has to follow the board policies. And
So they would be asking him these questions, and it's not clear whether I haven't seen public conversation on it. It was new information to me.
I'm not aware of that, of any.
So Lenny doesn't have the responsibility of
Okay.
who is the PI or not the PI on university contracts. That is the responsibility of the university to determine. The question of whether the president or any president, whether it's Dr. Lasner or any other president, can serve as the PI on large awards has never come into question or never has been discussed publicly within the Board of Regents. As far as I'm concerned, for the last 30 years, 30-plus years, I've been with the university.
Would you agree with me that this is outside normal practice? This is something I have had conversations with former university presidents, and this was surprising information to them and not an example of normal practice.
I will say that David is extremely passionate individual, especially when it comes to IT, like the MHPCC and the Pacific Disaster Center. I know those because the university did not have these contracts back in the 90s, especially the Mike High Performance Computing Center was actually awarded to the University of New Mexico. And then President Lasner, back then as a young, he was not even the CIO, he was asked to lead a team of individuals to recompete that back in the 2000s, and we won that award in 2001. The same with the Pacific Disaster Center. It was a project that was not very well defined. I think David was asked to take over and make the project functional. And he did an absolutely great job. He hired a great executive director who runs the project now. So these two projects are special, I think, to David. And as an individual, and I know David 30-plus years, he works close to 24/7, 24 hours a day.
Right. I mean, my concern is not really about him as an individual. My concern is about the institution. So if we're making this a normalized practice, I am concerned that we will be creating a great deal of space for conflict of interest. So that's, I mean, I want to make sure that you understand that this is not about
I do,
President
Chair.
Lasner.
It's not conflict of interest. I think it would be conflict of commitment. That means, you have so many hours in a day, and you have one job, but if you do something else, can you add more to that? So I don't think it's a conflict of interest, it's more of a conflict of commitment. It's time, right?
I think that he holds a great deal of power in driving the direction of the university, and if he has pre-identified interests, he has a lot of power to make sure that that direction is oriented around his research interests. So I will say there's...
Perceived conflict of interest,
yes,
I would say.
The public would say there's a potential conflict of interest.
As I said, in our 30 years that I've been here, I think probably David because he's extremely passionate, he's the only president I know that he's been a PI on these two large awards because, these were, from when he was young, these were his
I appreciate
his
that.
babies,
And I
right?
also appreciate that it's hard to give up your babies,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But also that's what one does when one moves to another position. And that's, very common practice for many academics who then move into administration. And that's why many do not want to go into administration.
Yeah, but also for a lot of academics that they go to the administration, they remain faculty. I'll take myself. I do
Right.
my own research because I know everyone's time is limited, and I'm going to go back to my faculty position, and I want to be current, and I want to actually have my research program, graduate students, and teach.
Want to have it all.
Why not? I taught while I was an administrator. I was asked, but
Right. Okay, so I want to pivot briefly. If I could talk to RCUH again, please, if it's okay with the committee. Okay. I also wanted to talk about the employees. So folks who are hired through the contracting process that RCUH facilitates.
Correct.
Okay, so it's long been a topic of a pretty heated discussion that not only, so there have been some assertions that the scope of RCUH's work is perhaps overly broad, as even the preamble of this bill discusses, but also that the hiring mechanisms exempts a large swath of workers who would otherwise be placed in our bargaining units. And I'm asking you about this because there have been assertions about the public benefit of the research monies that have been brought into the state in recent years, and those numbers have increased dramatically in recent years. And also there is some prospect of an additional increases in the near future. Mm-hmm. And to make sure that those benefits redound to the community members, as a union person, I would like to know why it is that, you folks have objected to the inclusion or the placement of more of those workers into bargaining units. So if you could just talk about your perspective.
Well, I believe that it all falls back on research needing the ability to hire and fire quickly. And for projects that have deliverables, they come and go, and there's no funding to support people long-term. It's not like a state position where you have somebody in a G. Before there were a lot of G-funded positions, not so much anymore. So if we have extramural awards coming in to pay for a project, you need to get that project rolling once it's awarded, and you need to execute on that award. You need to hire people. You need to do all the procurement to support. So the first part is, in my opinion, the easy part. Once you get the money. Getting the money is not easy. PIs work hard to get the awards. But once that process is done, getting the money is, again, fairly easy. But executing and doing what your contract deliverables require is very critical, and it has to be done quickly, sometimes very quickly. And there's no, generally there's a set term for them. Some projects, continue to run year after year. That's where some of the problems arise when people say that, we have some employees that have been there for so long. We have core staff, roughly 34 people that support all of the university. We do have, I think, one person that's been there like 30 years. But for obvious reasons, you want your core staff to remain with you to get the job done. We had another one who was that long as well, but retired. But in the field side, the researcher side, it's not that common to have people in positions for a long period of time, although it does happen. I think we just went through, our HR department worked closely with UH. That was one of the concerns that was raised. and we've looked and evaluated the processes that we use to hire people, and we've been cleaning that up. And I think we're very close to getting that wrapped up. And so we understood the concerns, and we're looking at it. I just don't see a solution to have people who are paid for by extramural awards come in and have long-term positions if the funding dries up.
So then you wouldn't object to the language that was in the original version of this bill in the SB1 that calls for a consultation with HDA around whether or not those positions are best suited for exempt or unionized status. You wouldn't object to that language. It was amended out of the last version, so.
I think that we would have to consult with UH on that too.
Let me say, Chair, that RCUH in the past years, in some cases, some of the positions that or employees that hired through RCUH could have been hired through the state system. We have put a pretty comprehensive policy, AP 12204, where we actually work with our Office of Human Resources. And if any of that position is actually on the list of the approved positions of HGA civil service, especially the APT, which is quite broadband and quite expensive, then we require the departments to go through HGA. I will tell you for my own experience, we have now that we go through this APT broadband, we hire through HGA. We're working at, there are, current RCUH employees that they have to remain on their positions, but new employees that they come into the system, if they are on that APT list, and a lot of them are, then we go through HGA. And I want to give actually credit to Ms. Gouveia, the other Gouveia, that she has actually done a magnificent job on the OHR, especially on the system, on the hiring level. So it is very fast and efficient to hire employees through the APT system and through the HGA.
So then the answer to my question is no, you wouldn't object. Because you're already doing it, it sounds like.
Yes,
or you're doing something that approximates that.
I wouldn't object as long as it doesn't delay the hiring process. And in the past, I, as a PI, could put a position description, and then the Office of Human Resources would come back to me and say, well, maybe this you got to go through the civil service. But then the PI could actually appeal that and say for reason X, Y, Z, expediency, all kinds of reasons, will you allow me to go through RCUH? And sometimes we did. Now we have tightened that, and we actually not require, or it was my office, OVPRI, that would actually make a decision on that appeal. Now in the new policy, there is no appeal to that. OHR and the Office of the Vice President of Research together will make a decision whether a position belongs within HGA or can go to RCUH. And so you can go one say yes, the other says no.
Okay. So I actually have more questions in that area, but we can talk about it offline. I'd like to hear HGA. Because I'm not convinced that having the employer make those decisions is in the worker's best interest.
Thank you, Chair. I think at the minimum, we feel consultation is appropriate. So at least at least it provides a check on what positions that they're hiring, that if it's either RCUH or it'd be more appropriate to be included in a bargaining unit. We would definitely be open to, instead of consultation, maybe a mutual agreement so that there'd be more of a check and stuff. Because right now we, quite frankly, can be kept in the dark on the positions that they hire in the current process. So if there is any check, we would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, and then I know that we're talking, currently it seems to me, that we're having some back and forth about the numbers, but we're looking at more than 2,500 workers. And it does seem to me that most of them would fall within the purview of HGA, but that some of them also might fall within the new ALU bargaining unit. So I think that would be an additional conversation, and they might also be an interested party. So I'm also trying to think about how best to craft this language so that it provides for that flexibility. But I do think labor should be part of that conversation. Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we've exhausted, unless you want to add something.
I just want to say one point. I do agree with Vasilis that if it causes delay, that especially significant delay, that's going to really impact research, and that is really the purpose of RCUH to, help get things through quickly and correctly. I don't have a problem with the union. We've identified the issue, and I think that we have a solution. But that doesn't mean we're not open to having further discussion on, how we could move forward so that they can see more of the light, I guess. To that extent, I don't have a problem with that. But if it does cause delay, that's where the researchers and the state will suffer.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Yeah, thank you. Members, if there are no more questions, I'm going to move on to HB 1802. So this is relating to the University of Hawaii revenue bonds. It authorizes the Board of Regents of the University of Hawaii to issue revenue bonds for the purpose of financing capital improvement projects. And we only have one testifier on this measure, Calbert Young, University of Hawaii, in support in person.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Calbert Young for the University of Hawaii. So we support this bill. There's a couple of points that I want to make clear for the members, though. So the process for revenue bonds requires the legislature to grant the university authority to issue revenue bonds. That does not mean that we will issue revenue bonds. So in this instance, there are no projects that the university has identified on the horizon that would use revenue bonds or that we are asking for revenue bonds. There could be in the future, and that's what the bill would provide for. Similarly, if the legislature were to identify any capital projects that it would want revenue bonds to be the source of funding, the legislature would also have to have a bill like this to authorize university revenue bonds. The process for revenue bonds is also pretty involved. It would require the Board of Regents to approve projects for revenue bond and then also authorize the actual issuance of revenue bonds. So it's a very lengthy process. So all that to be said means this is not the be-all, end-all or the singular item to issue revenue bonds. And then for a little finance technical education, if you will, revenue bonds are not general obligation bonds of the state. Revenue bonds are the debt of the University of Hawaii, not the state of Hawaii. So they are secured by, as the name implies, very specific revenues of the university. Unlike general obligation bonds, which you folks probably get to hear a lot more about, more typically of the state, they are secured by the general revenues of the state of Hawaii, meaning any and all revenues of the state of Hawaii to pay the debt. Revenue bonds are specific revenues of a particular issuer, in this case, the University of Hawaii. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? I'm happy to answer, Madam Chair.
Any questions? I have a question. So thank you for just staying there. It seems as though this is a tool that should have been used prior to this. And so are you asking this authority for the first time? And if so, or do you have to ask for it on a regular basis?
So historically, the university has always had revenue bond authority via the legislature, via bills like these. They are for fixed periods of time. So in this case, it's through 2029, I believe. So let's say 5 years. And historically, there have been other periods where the university has had some amount of revenue bond authority standing. Most of the time, no revenue bonds are issued, but it's a preemptive bill to have at the ready, essentially. The authority is preemptive at the ready. The last time the university had revenue bond authority, it lapsed in 2020, I want to say 2 or 2021. And it was an authority that was in existence for like 5 years. The university, we made the conscious decision not to pursue another bill to grant the authority to have it at the ready because credit markets were different at the time. The university didn't have any projects identified. I didn't believe that there was any projects on the near or far horizon that could be a potential candidate for revenue bonds. So I was like, I'm not going to come to the legislature and exert the energy or the trouble to put in a bill. This one, again, the university has not identified any specific projects, but I do believe that there are some potential projects that might be applicable. So it might be good to have it, we'll do the effort now, have it at the ready. But if those projects should ever materialize, I want the legislature to realize that it would still require, you got to get these projects appropriated in the budget. It has to, i.e. the legislature would have to identify that the source of funds is revenue bonds. You would at least be able to say, we already did the authorization bill, so you have to go through all of these. And then at the same time, University of Hawaii, we would have to get the Board of Regents to agree to undertake the project, to want to do revenue bonds. And then there's a whole process that it doesn't involve the legislature or the university to go through the actual process of trying to get revenue bonds transacted. Yeah, so it's a very involved process. Yeah, but it's preemptive. This bill is preemptive.
What is that? What do you mean by that?
Preemptive?
Yeah.
Meaning that there is no projects identified right now, and you really would be doing this. You're going to have to do it eventually if there were a project identified, right? So you're going to have to do this bill at that point in time if you don't do it now. It's preemptive in that you have the bill at the ready. If the university was to identify a project, or if the legislature identified a project and decided or wanted it to be revenue bond funded, you already have the bill done. Yeah.
Okay. Preemptive, I just always think preemptive strike. So, sorry. Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none. We are going to move on to HB 1784 relating to taxation. So for the taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2023, this temporarily reinstates the technology infrastructure renovation tax credit and expands the definition of technology-enabled infrastructure to include data servers. The first person to testify on this measure is Mary Yokota, Deputy AG, with comments on Zoom. In person.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Mary Yokota from the Attorney General's Office. We submitted testimony providing comments. In our testimony, we bring to your attention a provision that may be read in a manner that was not intended, and we suggest a way to address this concern. I am available if you should have any questions. Maybe I'm too short. Yeah.
You can just pull it down.
Okay.
It's flexible.
Okay. Did you have any questions? Otherwise, we have nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next to testify, we have Igari Suganuma, Department of Taxation, with comments in person.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Clinton Piper, Department of Taxation. We submitted written comments. I'll stand on those comments and available for questions.
Thank you. Next to testify, we have Tom Yamachika, Tax Foundation of Hawaii, with comments on Zoom.
Good afternoon. This is Jade McMillan on behalf of Tom Yamachika for the Tax Foundation of Hawaii. We've submitted some comments on the measure. We'll send on our written comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next to testify, we have Rebecca Lieberman, Charter Communications, with comments in person.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Rebecca Lieberman from Charter. We support this measure. We provided comments, including a suggested amendment to try to expand this tax credit a little bit to help make all the broadband dollars that the state's about to receive stretch a little bit further. We're happy to work with the committee on updated language it seems like that amendment might be a little broad, but we'll work with you to try to see if we can narrow it specifically to make it more targeted to those rural areas. But we want to try to help the state make those broadband dollars go as far as possible. So that's our thought process with the bill.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Next to testify, we have Muyong O, Serve Pack, in support in person.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Myung-oh here on behalf of ServPAC. We're aware of the concerns or the comments shared by DOTAX. We do have language that we can provide the committee to clarify what is a data server. Really appreciate the committee's help, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And last to testify on our agenda today is Janine Suki, Hawaiian Telecom, with comments in person.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Janine Suki with Hawaiian Telecom. You have my written testimony, but similar to the comments that Rebecca Lieberman mentioned with Charter Communication, we do support an amendment to extend tax credits so that we are able to help offset the additional costs that would be incurred with stretching federal dollars to the very rural areas of our state to extend broadband services. So for those reasons, we support your consideration of our amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. We only have one additional testifier on this measure, Ruthie Griffin from Hawaiian Electric, in support. Members, is there anyone else who would like to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, are there any questions? Okay, then we will move on to our final measure. Yes, our final measure, House Bill 2710. So this is relating to telecommunications, requires a wireless communications carrier as a condition for any conservation district use permit to construct, reconstruct, or alter a telecommunications facility on Ka'iva Bridge to maintain emergency backup power for a minimum of 8 hours. So the first to testify on this measure, we have Michael Kane, DLNR, in opposition in person.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. I did want to stand before you and provide a qualification that our opposition wasn't hostile opposition. We understand from talking to your staff that this is a public safety issue. Our concern is that conservation district laws need to apply uniformly statewide and not to a particular area. And given that they clarified that it was a public safety issue, we might want to gently consider looking at a part of HRS where we could apply it statewide. But I didn't want to say, put it in this other agency's rules. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next to testify, we have Colin Lau, Deputy AG, with comments on Zoom or in person.
In person, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Deputy Attorney General Colin Lau. We've submitted written comments, and the comments are basically that it's possible that this particular bill could be considered violative of Article 11, Section 5, which is about exercising powers over by general laws. This is over state lands and lands that are controlled by the state. So these lands are controlled through land use controls through the Conservation District, and there's also a particular parcel on Ka'iva Ridge, which is owned by the state. The mention of Ka'iva Ridge is not particularly defined, but that doesn't really take it out of the ambit of Article 11, Section 5. It would still need to be by general laws. Finally, the point we also made in our written testimony is that usually when we do have a provision that's amending Chapter 183C, it is for the purpose of conserving, protecting, preserving natural resources. So it addresses natural resources and not so much a use that's permitted for the natural resource. I'm available for questions, and that's it.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. It's very complex. We also have, well, that's the last person testifying in person or on Zoom. We also had testimony from Jerry Keegan, CTIA, the Wireless Association in opposition, from David Thompson, Bluestone Townhomes, Board of Directors in support, James Munier, individual in support, another individual in support, and Thomas Sister Lanikai Association in support. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in this measure? Seeing none members, are there any questions?
Can I, maybe the AG's office? Yeah. This was a very last minute bill because this neighborhood has been having power outages, and post Lahaina, they are kind of trapped by a ridge line, one way in, one way out, and they feared that without the ability to communicate via cell phones, they wouldn't be able to get instructions on what to do, and also to call 911, et cetera. So I appreciate your comments and the DLNR comments that it should have been statewide. That occurred to me as well after I submitted the bill for drafting, but it was too late to change it and still introduce it on time. So based on your testimony, if we switch it to 27-45, where it's broadband-related permits, and just add in the same amendment that was proposed for the other one, would that just say, as a condition for any permit under this chapter, a wireless telecommunication carrier needs to have a backpack power of minimum of 8 hours? Does that work, or what would you recommend?
The particular problem is that it specifies it's for Ka'iva Ridge.
No. This is statewide now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
That would take it out of that problem with constitutionality.
Yeah.
And another potential chapter is in Chapter 269 under the PUC, because that also addresses telecommunications.
So I had picked this one based on your testimony. Are you changing your mind now of the best one?
Oh,
or-
no.
Okay.
2745 is great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we also need to modify the PUC chapter or no?
It's just, I don't have subject matter expertise over the PUC chapter, so I'm a little afraid to touch it, just like Mr. Kane mentioned that. Our ambit is more natural resources and DLNR, so that's how we're approaching it, is from the standpoint of DLNR.
Right. And then my second question is, my understanding is that California did this in 2020 statewide. But they required much more backup, I think, in terms of the capacity. But one of the testifiers from a wireless communication industry, they said that this was, they would face legal concerns, which then begged the question is, why was it okay in California? Do you have any comment on that?
I'm not familiar with that particular law that you're talking about and what the legal concerns might have been that were raised.
I'm looking at the testimony now to try to find it. They clearly have a vested interest in not doing anything extra, but what did they say? Okay, it presents legal concerns. Backup power mandates like those in this bill are expressly preempted by Section 332 of the Federal Communications Act.
That's probably beyond my purview. I'm
Okay.
really sorry to say, I
Okay.
don't have any familiarity with the FCC.
Right, but there wouldn't
Yeah.
be anything unique about California that makes it okay there and not here, if it's a federal law.
Probably not. I'm just kind of shooting off the cuff here, though. I think what could strengthen this particular piece of legislation is if you have a preamble that explains your link between the emergency backup power to the wildfire, or, you know, that kind of idea. Because frankly speaking, when I read it, I really didn't understand what the link was. And so I just approached it just from the legal standpoint. Constitutionality, just does it make common sense to, you know, someone off the street in terms of our law? And
Thank you very much. Thank you,
sure.
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Okay, as I mentioned at the top of this hearing, we are going to defer decision-making on all of these measures. We'll also have decision-making on one measure that we heard on Wednesday at our hearing. So we'll have that decision-making on this next Wednesday at 2 p.m. We are adjourned.